So I want to point out, you saw that video. I built a thing for that. It's called Neon Cone of Doom. You may have seen it for a few seconds in there. That thing, I worked on it for 3 months. I had 3 helpers. Vanessa Coomerly and Robert Rogers worked on it a bit, and Michael, and we built it on the roof of our house. It's 16 feet in diameter, 8 feet tall. It had 100 neon units on it, 9 separate circuits, and each one was individually run from a separate transformer. The pallet that they were on weighed 500 pounds. It was hanging on a 400-foot cable tied to the top of this warehouse that we were in, and it rotated. It had a full rotator slip ring for the electrical, and it rotated, and it was wired up so that it would stay on while it rotated going down the cable. This is one of the most elaborate, crazy, big things I ever built in my life, and it was about it was like 1% of the show. So I'm trying to like describe the scale of a full-scale survival research lab show. It's hard to describe. So something I worked on for that long, it was a tiny, tiny part of this larger tableau. Anyway, this is the guy behind this, is, the guy who's come up with the ideas and the inspiration to do this. Inspired hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of artists for decades now. And I can say with authority, and by the way, if there's any all SRL crew here, inside there's a stack of high fructose magazines that has an article that I wrote on SRL a while ago, and you're you can pick up one, please keep it. Any that are left are free, and anybody who wants the article that I wrote on Survival Research Labs, pretty comprehensive article, please pick up one of those magazines. They're complimentary. To be able to work with such an incredible, I can't even describe. I've had a very blessed life. I've been able to work on some really interesting things, and I've been very fortunate that way. But that Doom show is one of the 5 most amazing things in my entire life. Hard to describe the intensity. That was inside a building, the noise, the sound. The one thing that we fucked up on with the rotating cone is that we didn't get the exploding bolt finished at the last minute. So the idea was that once it had been rotating for a while on the ceiling, the exploding bolt would explode, and then it would be released, and it would go down the cable onto the ground where it would be destroyed. Okay, but we didn't get that done. So I had to climb up in the rafters of that building over the show. Okay, and it's a big covered building, and it was so smoky up there you couldn't see 3 feet ahead of you, and I had to go up there with a knife and cut the rope to release the thing. And by the time I got to it, I was literally almost passing out from lack of oxygen, and by the time I climbed back down the superstructure of the roof, the interior roof beams, I got to the windows about 20 feet above the ground. I had to break a window out and stick my head out to breathe because I was literally passing out. So that was it was an orgiastic experience in so many ways. Anyway, so that's SRL. Major influence I can state on every single machine and fire art thing at Burning Man for the first 15 years. Somebody in that group, usually the principal, apprenticed or worked at SRL at some point in time. SRL never performed at Burning Man. I remember trying to talk Mark into it in about '92, and he didn't want to do it because he didn't want to go to the desert and get the machines dirty. I think that was what was that?
No, nobody had any money for us. It's not free freedom isn't free when you're talking about an SRL show. So I went to the first Burning Man where the cops chased us from the Ocean Beach, right? And then they moved it to Baker Beach, and the cops chased everybody out of there. I remember that. That was fun. It's fun getting chased by the cops. But that's about as close as I came. Except I knew, John and everyone else who was out there rousting it up in the beginning.
So as far as like collaborative work, because when you started SRL, it was you, and you did some small machine shows, like one on Columbus Avenue in the city, and the machines that you had built, and then you partnered with a couple guys for a while, with Matt and Eric for a while, and then the thing grew and grew into a much larger group. And the thing to me was, when I was able to join, because I was not a machinist, I wasn't a coder, I wasn't even really an artist. I didn't consider myself an artist, but I did neon stuff. I was a neon sign hanger, and I really loved SRL. And after seeing a couple of shows, I really wanted to be involved. And so I remember Michael and I would just bring neon transformers over to the shop, and we just leave them there, and then we started hanging out. And then I got the idea, well, I don't really do art, but I could make some big dumb neon thing that could be destroyed, by the machines. And so and I saw dozens of people for sure, who would come around the shop and would become engaged in some way. You didn't have to. I mean, prop building was my part of it, which is a minor part of the shows because they were about the machines and the interaction of machines. But with a good set and a good backdrop, and usually based on some concept that Mark had come up with, that really included. That could anybody who could build or create anything could be part of that. I mean, people doing costuming, people doing carpenters, metalworkers, woodworkers, sign guys. Anybody could be involved in that. And I consider it a real meritocracy because a lot of times SRL would get tarred with the thing about being an all-boys club because it's all testosterone. And it is not an all-boys club. Jennifer Holmes, would you care to comment on that? Okay, never an all-boys club, not from the beginning. Yeah. But I'd like to point that out. It was a genuine meritocracy. If you were some hipster who wanted to hang out and be cool, you'd be given like a greasy broom and told to clean out the grease pit. And if you did that and worked, you could hang out and stay. But it was about doing the work. And it was about getting really dirty and doing shit that's really impossible. I mean, with no resources too. Like, can you talk about the no resources part, Mark?
Well, that was the thing. Is like, my original, inspiration to do SRL was, years before when I worked in industry. I wanted to learn how to make a little bit of spare cash, so I wasn't like an artist working at a coffee shop or something like that. There's nothing wrong with that. I buy coffee from artists that work in coffee shops all the time, but I didn't want to do it, and so I learned. I professionally learned the trades, and I loved the tools, the techniques and stuff. But I was like, something really stinks about like. Why am I making like this tractor trailer? It's gonna be hauling a bunch of like weird like widgets that like are gonna be used to make other widgets that someone's gonna buy, and then they're just gonna feel bad about buying it because they don't even know why they bought it. But why am I making something that someone's gonna use to like, learn how to strafe like people in Vietnam, right? And I it was a real contradiction, and SRL was. The idea of SRL, which I came up with in '78, was a solution to the problem. And so initially I just thought it would be great to just do these shows with machines and machine parts and use all these techniques that I had learned. And when I didn't, and do these big shows, I didn't really think about it, but I needed all these other people to do it in the beginning. And then I just started doing it, and all these people showed up. From scientists, from people getting their doctorate degree at Stanford, and just people people working in the trades, artists, weirdos, just the weird riffraff of San Francisco. We all just pitched in and just in this ad hoc way, just started doing these shows, and there was enough organization and strategy and logistics that it worked somehow, and enough people had like. The very specific skills to make sure that things functioned well enough that people accepted it as a working unit. The output was actually something that did what it was supposed to do. It provided entertainment, this kind of crazy entertainment where there shouldn't have been any. And, I just think it was so weird that nobody tried to stop it. It was just so from another dimension. It was like, it was like the Terminator dropping out of like a time-space vortex. No one knew what to do for many, many years until finally it just was, finally people tried to rein it in, and we just went to other cities and did it, and the, optimal SRL experiences where you just go someplace else, do one show, and then leave right away. That's the way to do it. Trying to just do a bunch of these things like the Doom Show in San Francisco eventually just became kind of toxic, unfortunately. It's a lot more expensive to do shows in other places, which means you got to partner with not just people, but you have to partner with people with money or influence or institutions, which, is a necessary evil if you want to keep doing it. So we did all, Tokyo. John made an amazing prop in Tokyo that was like a house of cards, literally like 70 feet tall. But we also spent $500,000 in Tokyo of somebody else's money. So we're we're still kicking it, you know, always looking for people to work with, but you know, it's like they say, you tell your kids, be careful what you put on the internet because like it'll never go away. And now SRL is like we're standing in the shadow of all the bad things we did that you can just go online and look at. So it makes it hard for like a curator to like pretend like, oh, I didn't know they were going to do that. I just thought they were like these sort of weird artists that did this like theater stuff. You know, I didn't know they were going to like, you know, reanimate animals or run a V1 in downtown, and, you know. But we're always looking for locations. Always looking for locations, always looking for partners with money to spend on these shows. So anyway.
With that said, you know, there's the way that we supported this kind of work, like in the 70s and 80s, a little bit easier. And I don't live in the past at all, and things are different. Than some things were better, some things were worse. But with that said, San Francisco and Oakland were largely, you know, desolate cities in a certain sense. A lot of abandoned buildings. There were a lot of detritus, and just the economic situation had changed from shipping and industry, you know, in the 19th century, you know, 18th, 19th century, and then it would shifted to banking and tourism, and in the interim period, which was the 70s, late 60s, 70s, and 80s, there were all these abandoned buildings and junk lying around, and nobody really cared that much about it. It was illegal to go into them, okay, but nobody really cared much, so we used them. We were able to use these locations for events. SRL was able to, you know, salvage materials from them, the old shipyards. The statute of limitations has run out on all of this stuff now, so we can talk about it. But I mean, there are, I know a dozen machinists. Well, not all of it. That's true. We won't talk about the stuff that the stats haven't run out on. But I know a dozen machinists and builders that have outfitted their shops from detritus from the old shipyards. You know, like machines that were rotting away, and just like, you know. So that was one way that we were able to do this stuff. So that I don't know who it was, but somebody at SRL coined the term obtainium. It might have been Mark, it might have been somebody else. I don't know if anybody really knows. And that the idea with that was that obtainium was simply some kind of matter that an artist could get a hold of through whatever means. You know, we don't need to discuss the means so much, in order to use as material or support for the art that they were doing. That was obtainium, and this has inspired a lot of people, including Obtainium Works up in Vallejo, which is an amazing collective of artists, really astonishing. And they just, you know, gathered materials together and make cool stuff. So I'd like to, I mean, can you talk about a little bit about how the original concepts, when you started realizing that obtainium was a thing or was an idea?
Well, you know, I always had this thing where I like to go scrounge around pretty much by myself in old buildings and places. And, you know, I did that before I moved to San Francisco in '77. And, you know, I got here and I'd drive around on my, you know, usually I'd pick a weekend and I'd drive around San Francisco and kind of snoop around, and there's a lot of abandoned stuff there, you know. So I just remember I found this brewery where the Costco is now, down at like 11th Street or wherever the Costco is. And there was a whole square block of this brewery. And I was like, huh, and I just, on a Sunday, I just parked my motorcycle and went in there, and like 2 dogs rushed at me, and you know, one Doberman lunged at me and I hit him in the head with a 2x4, and the other German Shepherd got scared and they kind of backed off, and I was like, wow, this place is really cool, and I escaped without getting attacked. And I was like, this place is pretty cool, I gotta come back here again. But I'm gonna figure out how to deal with the dogs first. So, but I went back again and they remembered me, and so when I came in, they ran the other way. They didn't try to attack me, and I said, cool. So I started walking inside this entire city block, and there was, all the equipment was still in there. It was like they turned the factory off the day before. But of course, it was pristine because everyone was scared of the dogs. But because the dogs were scared of me, I was good to go. So I just started looking around there, and I realized there was an entire factory there. And I studied the equipment. I was like, wow, all these things fit together in all these different ways. And, you know, I kind of had vestigial memories of working in industry, and I said, yeah, everything, it's all made to fit together. You don't really need to know anything. And then I just, again, from all my angst about what the purpose of all that use of technology and tools was, you know, I kind of had an aversion to that, but I was like, this is the solution. The solution is logistics. You have to have the stuff. Once you have the stuff, you're home free. And so I came up with I sat down for a couple weeks and just came up with the idea of SRL. I haven't looked at sketches where I sketched out like a scene at night with like a bunch of people in 1978 and like all these machines and like a backdrop and like, lights and everything like that. And I was like, yeah, it's gonna be just like that, really easy. And, but the key was all this equipment. So there's like multiple breweries in San Francisco, all of which were in the same state of secure to the casual viewer, but not secure to a person with a more discerning attitude, let's say, about security. And so I just came up, I stole the name Survival Research Laboratories. I'm from a right-wing paramilitary group that was defrauding people at Soldier of Fortune with ads for fake things for your AR-15 or whatever. And, they put one ad in one issue of Soldier of Fortune, and I just remembered it. I was like, oh, that's the name. I'm going to take Survival Research Laboratories. What a great name. And I can defraud people too. I was like totally, the corporations rule because corporations can do whatever they want to do. And they're people now, so now SRL is a person. So, I had a sense back then that was the way to go. Lawlessness, needs corporations to function. And so I just, somebody said, hey, that whole idea with these machines is great. You're doing these billboards and stuff, and like, I'll give you a full page ad in my magazine, Boulevard's magazine, a free magazine. So I made an ad for Survival Research Labs with my phone number. And like, I have the same message machine back then as I do now. For your convenience, this call is being answered by our telephone answering service. Please leave your name, telephone number, and a brief message after you hear the tone. Thank you. This woman, I got it from a Goodwill, but I had that on my message machine, so all these people were calling the number that saw the thing, and they would hear that message and leave me weird messages. And so that was how it all started. And just a simple, young 20-some-year-old kid. And then, all these people, my friends, just people I knew, and Mark Sangerman, Janice Sangerman, my brother, Monty Kazaza, just goofing around. It just got bigger and bigger. And, I'll tell you an important thing that very few people know from a historical standpoint. The first real connection between SRL and the Cacophony Society, Suicide Club, was that I got approached by the Cacophony Society, and they had a newsletter they would put out every month of all the cool, weird things in San Francisco. And this was 1981. And they said, hey, we really want to publicize your show. And I said, great, do it, man. You got my permission. And so they put that in the newsletter. And previously, we had like, a few hundred people would come to these things. Well, that show that we did with New Langdon Arts, An Unfortunate Spectacle of Violent Self-Destruction, we got 2,000 people at that show, and I was like, holy fuck. Just like that picture I drew in the journal back in '77, that was really what kicked off like the big productions. And but that was just San Francisco. San Francisco was this kind of ad hoc place where like, instead of people like fighting with each other to be like the first person that could get the gallery show that would get all the money, like New York was super competitive that way, LA was competitive that way, snitty kind of, it's a different attitude, but San Francisco was like, oh, that's cool, and you could just get a bunch of people to work on a project. It just was like, if it was interesting, people would say, I don't need to get a bunch of money, I don't need that it's made, it doesn't need to be like on Broadway. It's just, if it's cool, we'll do it. So you could kind of get this grassroots, like, kind of juggernaut happening. And it just, we would get like, and still like 50, 100 people working on these shows. It was like shooting a feature film. And that's kind of it. That, and I also credit the lawlessness. I mean, San Francisco has that history of lawlessness. And I saw it, and I was like, fuck, you could do any fucking thing you wanted to here. You could, like, you know, do anything. And you know, I said, well, I'm an artist. I don't have to be like a criminal or like, you know, a gang member or something like that. I can just be an artist. I can get away with anything too. And so we just started doing it, and I realized that people just could not say no to lawlessness in San Francisco. I mean, the cops would literally stop us in the middle of doing some crazy thing, and they'd go, oh yeah, you're those guys who do those machine shows. You know, there was an alarm in that factory over there. You probably better get out of here. This stuff in the back of the car is yours, right? Oh yeah, it's ours. Well, you better get out of here because you could, you know, you don't want to get mixed up in that. I mean, literally, just so many surreal experiences like that over the years. I mean, now you go to San Francisco, you get your phone snatched, you know, or someone stabs you, you know. I mean, that's where the real excitement is now. The lawlessness is like, there's no artist left to be lawless, so it's like, it's everybody else, right? So, you know, your performance art is like getting mugged or, you know, having your bike stolen or having your car window broken. I mean, that's where it's at now. But back when we were in San Francisco, we carved out a territory that would, you know, that we went to over and over and over again of like the craziest, most insane things, just begging for the world to say no. But you know, they never really did.
Yeah, so I was in a group called the Suicide Club, which I joined at the tender age of I just turned 19, and the Suicide Club was urban exploration, weird pranks, street theater. Basically, anybody in the group could do anything, any idea that they came up with, and list it as an event, and the people in the group would come and help them do it if they thought it was a funny idea. And so, and we used abandoned buildings mostly to, you know, we'd use them for events that we were doing and for explorations, or we would play games in them. And like I said earlier, that's how I ran into Mark quite a bit. But I originally met Mark when Gary Warren, who was kind of the avatar for the Suicide Club, he collected weird people, and he really knew everybody in town. And he introduced me to Vale, introduced me to Dick Gakowski is one of the guys who started the Roxy Cinema, and all these other really interesting, weird people. And so I said, we're going to go over and check out, you know, he took me to that first show that I mentioned earlier, and he said, we're going to meet the artist, who, you know, the guy who's like doing this stuff. So I remember we went to your shop, and this was before your accident, and you know, you had just gotten the shop. Yeah, SRL's got a pretty good safety record with a couple of major exceptions. And Mark, you know, working on what was it, jet fuel, right?
I was, you know, I always was interested in pyrotechnics. So we were making like TNT and you know, primary explosives and detonating them. You know, me and Heckard were doing that back in like '82, and things were a little bit out of hand, but nothing ever really happened. But then my friend, who was a physicist, doctoral student at Stanford, goes, hey, if you know you're interested in these rocket things, you know, I found this pamphlet at the Stanford Library on from Morton Thiokol on how to make like test batches of rocket fuel. And I was like, no shit. And he goes, yeah, it's got all the information on how to do it. And I was like, bring it on. So I got that, and I followed the instructions, bought all the chemicals, and because I was a company, I could call up and buy the special rubberized epoxy binder for rocket fuel. And everyone was like, oh, Survivor Richard Sebs, hey, we're doing some work with rockets. And yeah, we're making rockets. So made a few 1,000-pound thrust motors. And, you know, I'm not the most calm guy in the world. We're getting ready to show, a lot of stress. We're getting ready for a show. There's a lot of stress, strain, and rushing around. And you got to cook these motors for a couple days in an oven to cure them. And like at 170 degrees, so we pulled them out of the oven, and they were probably cool, but maybe not, you know. And I was tapping the pin out of one, and I got a little fidgety, and I was like, God damn it, fucking thing. And I was tapping it out. I had my protective gear on, and that fucking thing blew up. The pin was coming out, but it blew up, blew me in the air, blew my fingers off. I landed. The first thing I did is look at my hand. It was just the bones there, and I was like, God damn it. And I almost got killed, but you know, I just went back to doing SRL after that. But you know, I was committed. By then, I'd been doing it for 4 years, and I was like, I ain't stopping now. But I tell you, you know, and it's a drag being a handicapped person sometimes. You know, sometimes you look at all the people in front of you and all, with 2 hands and, you know, everything like that. You kind of makes you a little nostalgic. But I'll tell you, you 2-handed people, there's nothing like getting into a situation where you have to shake somebody's hand that's like kind of a mucky muck, and they shake your hand and they act like they've been shocked with electricity. And you'll never have that experience.
Well, I just wanted to say one thing. He blew his hand up, and he didn't stop doing what he was doing. It didn't. It's like it was almost like a temporary blip in your career, if anything.
Yeah, that was in the summer of June 28th, 1982, and in November 1982, we staged a cruel and relentless plot that perverts the flesh of beasts to unholy uses outside of Somar's. So, again, all the weird people in San Francisco, like, where are the mummies? People ask, where do you get all those mummies? I mean, mummies on an industrial scale. And so here's the story to the mummies in San Francisco. So my friend was addicted to speed. He was a 6'6" speed addict, and he came to the shop in 1982, hadn't slept for a couple days. Lauren goes, dude, you guys gotta go to the train tunnels. Mummies in the train tunnels. Fucking mummies, man. Fucking mummies, like everywhere. And like, I remember me and Heckert were there, and he woke us up at like 7 in the morning, and in our underwear or whatever, we're going, yeah, right, Lauren. And then he left, and I looked at Heckert, and I go, do you think they're there? And he goes, I don't know. So me and Heckert, and I think a couple other people went to the tunnels, and sure enough, you walk 20 feet into those train tunnels on the east side of town, and there's frickin' all these animals cut in half and dried out because the air's blowing in there. And like, we started collecting them, and that's how the cruel and, you know, that's how that show came about. But again, the resources of San Francisco are endless. Endless in that way, you know. I mean, eventually, of course, Lauren got put in jail and, you know, went to prison for a while. But we, you know, the mummies stayed with us at SRL for many years. In fact, my wife, before I met her, Amy Critchett, she was forced to produce a show, an SRL show for the Wired Mackerel Party. And one of the things she said to me was, she said, I don't want any of those mummies in the show. And like, I was on speakerphone with a bunch of SRL people, and Lisa Pine was like next to me. And I hung up the phone, and I looked at Lisa, and I goes, let's go to the tunnels. So we made a whole like mummy carousel and all this stuff, and we had a bunch of like cats and dogs' feet, and we put them in the hors d'oeuvres at the party, and you know, and my wife still married me after that. Yeah, well, so yeah, you know, that's called the letter of the law. You know, we skirted the letter of the law there. No dead animals, just mummies. They're not really dead. They're mummies.
Speaking of mummies, I'm going to tell the Suicide Club Survival Research Lab's human skin story.
No! Too soon! Too soon!
Yes.
Oh, come on! Let's hear it, John!
So this is how I really became aware of John Law. So I got a phone call, like it was 1983 or 84. Somebody called me and they said, look, man, this is like such and such. And he goes, a friend of ours, he committed suicide with a machine gun. And like, you know, we got to get there. You know, the problem is that there was all these human skin in the freezer there, and we've got to get it out of there. And I'm like, okay. And they, can we bring it over to your place? And I'm like, okay, I guess, you know. And I didn't know, I thought it was a hoax call, right? So the next thing you know, John Law comes over with a fucking bag of human skin, and I'm like, okay. you know, mummies, yeah, you know, like old factories, yeah, but like human skin, I'm like, I gotta know where'd this come from, man? And so wait, so he goes, well, we went in here. Tell him where it came from.
Okay, all right. We were exploring an abandoned mortuary sciences building on Cathedral Hill. He wasn't, no. And it was a Suicide Club event, and it was the building was completely stripped out and abandoned. They were gonna tear it down in about a week or two. And on one side of the building was a giant high-rise apartment building. On the other side of the building was an occupied house. There were 6 or 8 of us. We had to be really quiet. We're creeping around the building, and so we were in there for about an hour or two. It was a beautiful building, like an old, like kind of Moorish theme architecture, 2 stories with a big lawn in front. And Chris Monterey came up. He'd been in the basement, and he said, "Hey, you got to see what I found." And he had a 5-gallon bucket, and it had formaldehyde in it. And he poked in it with a stick and pulled this thing out and folded it out on one of the steel tables, and it was a human skin with a hole cut out for the head and nipples and hair and the whole thing. And he said, "We have to keep this." And I'm like, "I don't think so." And I didn't want to carry it, you know, we couldn't carry it out of the building because, you know, if we got caught, I mean, you don't want to get caught with a human skin on Cathedral Hill. And so finally, you know, so I said, "Chris, come back and get it later." So he went back and got it later, and he kept it. And Chris is a great guy, but he's an eccentric, and he didn't get along with his roommates very well, so he's kind of passive aggressive. So he put the 5-gallon. That comes later. He was attacked by people. That's Chris Monterey. He was threatened by guys with machine guns. That's a true part of the story, but it came a little bit later. And so he had been he was passive aggressive, and he put the 5-gallon bucket in his refrigerator after pulling all the shelves out. And his roommates didn't know what it was, but they knew it wasn't anything good, and so they kicked him out of the apartment. And that's when he was assaulted by the guys with the machine guns, because he was like, and that's a story that he told me. So anyway, he had this human skin in a bucket. And he said, I don't want to throw it out. It's too interesting to throw out. I don't know what to do with it. And I said, call Mark Pauling. We'll give it to Mark Pauling. He'll be able to figure out what to do with it. And that's where the phone call came in.
So, fast forward 7 years later, Research Magazine does a book called Modern Primitives, which is all about tattooing, and there's a little thing in there about preserved, like Japanese, you know, gangster skins and stuff, and like they're doing a book signing thing, and I'm like, hey, wait a minute, that skin's still in that fridge in the back of the shop, and so I said, I know what, and so we got a few people over there. We had a little sewing bee, and we sewed the skin, all the pieces, and trimmed them so that they look like a person again. And then Greg Colts, famous tribal primitive tattoo artist that I knew, he agreed to come over and tattoo the skin with a beautiful tribal tattoo. And so it looked like an outstretched body, and I made foam. I cut foam so it was draped over it. And then I got somebody I knew at the Museum of Modern Art to give me all the plexiglass, and I built a beautiful like case for it. And we just hung it on the wall at the book signing, and it just said, "From the collection of Survival Research Laboratories, tattoos by Greg Colts." And like everyone's like, I don't know, Vale probably, ask Vale, like, but it, you know, people liked it, I think. So after that, you know, it was resting at the shop, and you know, we're moving shit around, so the case got broke. And then there's rats got in, and next thing I know, it was behind the thing, and I looked at it and I was like, shit, it's almost all gone. The rats had eaten almost all the skin. So I have a little patch about yay big, just big, you know, just a little patch of it left, just as a reminder of the good old days. And not everyone agrees, you know. So my wife asked me not to tell this story, but look, I had to live with that thing in the shop, so I think I have a right to, you know, talk about it. It's John's fault anyway. I never would have had a skin if it hadn't been for fucking John Law. Never. And I wouldn't have never done it. That's the problem, you know, like 6 degrees of separation. It's just, it just gets, you know, really personal in a place like San Francisco where so many weirdos are. Like crazy shit starts to happen. It multiplies like rabbits. And so anyway, so the skin, that's all that's left of the skin. It never, never made it into a museum in Japan, and I never took a photo of it. I know Vale's got photos of it, right? Maybe, he says. He's got a photo of it somewhere. So that's how I met John Law, You could say we had some skin in the game.
So at any rate, Amy Critchett, Mark Pauline's wife, it was my fault. Mark was just an innocent bystander in that entire process.
Right.
So I like to ask, because another thing about working with SRL is there's an underlying, and it's something that's similar with the Suicide Club and Billboard Liberation Front, which is another group that I started. The other thing is, like, Mark was doing billboards in the late 70s, and that was something concurrent that we didn't know one another at the time, but I started a group with two other guys called the Billboard Liberation Front. It was an outgrowth of a Suicide Club event. We go up and improve outdoor advertising. And then we saw, and Mark was had been doing some billboards, had done a thing on Haight Street, a smaller thing, and then ended up doing this one really amazing large-scale billboard, like a Telly Savalas billboard, and it was pretty ominous and very threatening, like a lot of the SRL, later SRL stuff. What's that? Oh yeah, and North Beach, and the show on North Beach, But the so the billboard thing was ongoing. But one of the things about the suit that were similar, there's an underlying subtext of criticism of the larger commercial culture, and in SRL's case, criticism of and repurposing of military and industrial hardware to use it for art, which is a really amazing thing. And it was never blatantly, your face was never rubbed in it like, hey, we're making a statement about the military-industrial complex. It was implicit. It is implicit in the work. And it's something I find really interesting about SRL, and something that hit me on a visceral level, not an intellectual level at all, but more on a gut level, seeing these shows, because you'd always think to yourself, wow, what if this stuff was raining down on you and you had no choice and you couldn't get away, which is what happens with the military hardware that all of our tax money goes to, and to kill people all over the place. But taking that type of machinery and repurposing it into something that's a collaborative and interesting and artistic expression I think is a really brilliant and important thing, and part of SRL that I greatly admire and I'm hugely happy to be part of. And like you say, with the Billboard Liberation Front, we would make fun of advertising in corporations. We didn't go up and spray paint "fuck Exxon" on a billboard. That's really tacky. I mean, who the hell cares about that? We would change the billboards, and we would send out press releases saying that we were helping the copywriters at Chiat Day and Ogilvy Mathers because they weren't very good at what they're doing and they needed some help with their job. So, and then the newspapers would print this shit. That pretty much whatever we'd send out, they'd print, which is what I learned about journalism in some respect. And don't get me wrong, some journalists are awesome. Most journalists are really smart people and try to tell the truth, but it's very difficult because they work for corporations that have a very, very specific agendas that aren't always very happy for people. And I say that's part of the SRL, aesthetic that's not obvious. It's never been, it's not, your nose isn't pushed into it. And I'd like to ask you, Mark, what because I know you've mentioned it before and talked about it, but I'm curious about that and how you came to those, how you think, what you think about that.
Well, that's very generous of you, John. But the truth of the matter is when you're dealing with all the avalanche of technical crap that it takes to produce the instruments for an SRL show, get them to work, and then combine them and actually get a production made with them, there's not a lot of time for philosophical musings. So I would just have to say that most of the time, it's just, it's accidental. Whatever, fight you're fighting, or good or bad, or whatever it is, it's, it's just sort of, it's not my, I don't really describe the things, although I do agree, I listen to what people say about the shows. I'm very keen to hear like people's critiques and opinions about what they find has gone on in their heads when they see an SRL show, but I don't really, I don't really dwell on that because that's not the problem, you know. Like, you know, it's probably different than a lot of artists. You know, a lot of artists are more thinking about like what the purpose of their lives are and why they're doing things, you know. And I don't really care. I don't really have any choice in the matter. I just do it because it's just, you know, I'm programmed to do this somehow, and I don't even know why. And so I just sort of take it for granted that it's just normal to do these things, you know, every day. But you know, I do see that it appears as if it's been influential to people, and I think that's great, and it inspires people to the point where they have commentary about it, you know, which is good, you know. But I don't really spend a lot of time thinking about it. I am a big fan of the implied transfer of meaning and message. You know, I just think that if you throw enough crap at a problem, you know, and if you create a dense enough environment, then it blows up at a certain point, and voila, it becomes something important to people, you know. And the people that are making it, you know, it's important to us because, you know, the crew at SRL, everyone that's pulling together to make this happen, you know, but that's different, you know. It's like the excitement and the fun of it isn't necessarily in the actual production itself, you know. If anything, that's like kind of a drag, you know. But the fun is like working together, making it all happen, seeing the impossible happen. I mean, that's kind of where, you know, our focus is, I guess. So, but you know, for everyone else, it's like what happens when you can create that dense of a structure of stuff and activity and that many hours of work going into something, and just, you know, be willing to take the risk of destroying it all, and getting people to conspire with you to do that is, you know, make that happen is the fun part. So I'm not going to give you any easy answer to that. I'm just going to beat around the bush. I'll do it for hours. You know, I've got my personal opinions about this stuff, but I don't really consider them reliable enough and to be really worth repeating. So the people that know me know. Everybody else can just guess, but it's really not that. I don't really have that deep of thoughts about the philosophical ramifications of SRL.
Okay, well, other people have, and we're probably not going to stop. But so let's see. I'm thinking you want to take some questions from the audience, or you want to tell any other stories in particular you want to tell? Maybe talk about Japan, or maybe the Austin show or something. Those are the shows that I've worked on. That, yeah. Oh, the tower. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We'll talk about the Austin show a little bit, and the cow. And okay, so we do a show in Austin, Texas. And it's a big show. It's you got, you know, I don't know. I don't remember if it was underwritten by anybody or not, but
yeah, there was a bunch of like fairly well-to-do hipsters in Austin that funded the pre-production stuff, and then we basically we sold a lot of tickets. We sold 5,000 tickets for like $20-25. So we basically had 80 grand to burn. You know, no one made any money. We all lost a little bit of money, but you know, there was money there that we spent. And Texas money, it was Texas money, so you could buy twice as much as you could here.
So, but I'd like to comment about how involved you could get in this sort of stuff, because I drove there in a van with Seth Maxwell Malice and Wendy Flybutter and Tim Circus Boy Simpson. We drove all the way to Texas. We got there, and I didn't know what I was going to do, but we got there really early, and there's a long setup. We had a good deal of time on the Longhorn Speedway Meadows. The show was done in the middle of a big raceway. What's that? Yeah, we were there for 3 weeks setting up, so we had a lot of time to build stuff, which is really cool to do that. And we're in the middle of this raceway with a big, you know, bunch of bleachers on one side. And I was thinking, I didn't know what I was going to do. And people had donated materials and stuff. We were looking for stuff. The prop builders, the carpenters, and the prop builders like me. You have the machinists and the machine operators and the scientists and the really, the eggheads, doing the really hard stuff, right? And we build these great props. And they didn't have to be that solid because they're destructible, right? So what happened was we wanted to get a cow. It was Texas, so we wanted to get a cow. So Seth Malice was tasked with the job of finding a cow, and he spent like quite a long time trying to get one. A dead cow, by the way, and it was hard for him to find one. And we wanted it to be a centerpiece hung from 3 telephone poles. And somebody donated a giant pallet of trusses, 20-foot long trusses, and they're just a huge pile of them. And I asked Mark, I said, hey, can I have those? He's like, yeah, sure. And I'm like, cool. And so I sat down and got some help, and we built a 40-foot tower out of these trusses. Yeah, well, we did. We recreated. Yeah, we built this tower, and we recreated the University of Texas tower in the center of the UT campus, where Charles Whitman became the very first instance of media sensationalized, horrible killing spree, where he locked himself on the top of the tower and randomly shot people on the campus for several hours before the cops were able to break the door down and shoot him. So we recreated the tower. We skinned it. Kimrick Smythe made the Charles Whitman model, a human-sized robot that was put on the top of the tower. Yeah, and he had a hydraulic gun that raised up, and it spit fire at the audience. And the tower looked exactly like the UT tower. And as you drove into the speedway on the highway, because of the trees, there was an optical illusion. It actually looked like a 40-story tower. It was really creepy. And so we built this thing, and with a lot of help, Flynn Mouthy and Michael and a bunch of people worked on it. And during the show, it was torched to the ground. So you got your Charles Whitman up at the top shooting fire at the audience, and then the tower burned to the ground, like a 40-foot tower burned to the ground at the end of the show. And at one point, my helper and I were standing there behind this berm, and we realized that somebody had left an oxygen tank, like a 5-foot tall oxygen tank, standing up right next to this tower, which was engulfed in flame. And we're like, oh shit, we better get that out of there. And we tried to run over to get it and pull it out of the way, and it was too hot, and we simply couldn't get to it. And so there's this oxygen tank there, and fortunately it was not lying sideways, it was straight up and down. And so when the O-ring blew out, it basically shot a pure flame of oxygen 50 feet in the air, straight up. So it accelerated anything around it. Yeah, well, the actual science of the flame, Mark can explain, but it looked to me like it blew up. So, and the props and the number of people working on the show, and the number of props, and Flynn and some other people wrangled a boat. There was a boat, like a fucking boat, like a pretty big cabin cruiser that there was a pop. What's that? A gay cowboy carousel. That was another prop for the show.
The Marine,
Yeah.
the Marine
Because it had naked people on it, which wasn't really good for Central
flare
Texas.
fires.
What?
The flare fires.
So we put together a bunch of great photos of life-size photos and printed out on a big photorealistic printer of these gay porn magazines from the magazine on Polk Street. Great source of materials back then before the internet. And so there was a whole carousel with all these guys dressed with cowboy hats on and everything like that, getting it going. And so the owner of the place comes out, once we put with the carousel built, once we put all the pictures up in the daytime, he comes out and he goes, "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" He goes, "I got people around here that know me. We can't have this shit out here." He goes, "You gotta cover that shit up in the daytime." And so we had to cover it up for him. But, oh my God. But anyway, so, it was just great going to these places and doing this stuff, That's all. It was just an amazing thing. What were you saying, John, with some other?
Flares that were behind all that shit. When they
The
went
what?
up. Flares. The Marine flares.
Oh, yeah, the marine flares, yeah. There was a place that would sell me marine flares with parachutes on, but of course, they're marine flares. And that means that it doesn't really matter if they're still burning when they hit the ground because it's in the water, right? Well, when you do it in Austin, Texas, they hit the ground and start fires. So there was a few brush fires that got started in that show. And the fire department was very understanding about it. The police were not after the show, but the fire department were very understanding about it. Usually the other way around, but the fire department probably, kept them busy and they didn't really seem to care. The police were threatening to search the entire site afterwards, and they said, "You're never gonna come back to Texas again." I can tell you that for sure. We never did. He was right. But like, you know, anyway. And they didn't search everybody, all 150 people either, so that was nice too. But, you know. So let's take some questions. It was the little magazine, the little primer was written by Morton Thiokol. So the instructions were basically, it was basically a pamphlet that told you how to make test batches of rocket fuel for larger rockets. But it told, you know, how to make the, you know, we used spun fiberglass for the casings and ceramic nozzles, and, you know, they were fairly right to plan, you know. The menu, the recipe was followed carefully. And I tell you, that stuff was something. I mean, the little chunks of it, you would light a little chunk, like a half a piece of charcoal on the corner, and it would accelerate to a couple hundred miles an hour and bounce around the shop for about 30 seconds, just by itself. That stuff is energetic. I mean, there's a, you can launch spaceships with it and stuff. Or, but yeah, it was an actual publication from Morton Thiokol. It was like a scientific paper on how to do it. Not meant for civilian artists, weirdos in San Francisco to try. It was a two-part epoxy rubber binder, and there were a couple chemicals in there that were different specific gravities, and you would pour them in and let the rocket sit, and those would float and level out in the binder while it took a few days to cure. And so, you know, there was the chemical that was in one part of the rocket that would slow it down more than the chemical up here, so that the rocket burned at the same speed instead of, otherwise they would just explode. Basically, according to the manual, they would explode. So, you know, there was a little, no problem ordering those chemicals. I mean, nowadays maybe you would, but. I do not. That was destroyed along with all the other rocket motors when I was in the hospital in a coma, induced coma.
Mark, I take exception to you, like the happiest I've seen you is when you repurpose military hardware. Like when you, the joy in your voice when you're like, this armor is like, this piece of aluminum is special, or the rope for the spine robot.
Oh yeah.
So like what other pieces of military hardware do you repurpose for your art?
Well, V1 Buzz Bomb. Whoever knew that there was an entertainment value hidden in the V1 Buzz Bomb? It, you know, it was very entertaining to people well, it got people excited in London. Let's just say that. But where was the entertainment value? I had to find out, so I built one. But you know, and they're that thing, and also all the sound weapon stuff like the whistles, and which eventually the V1, but we did end up making a really nice jet whistle. Those were all based on military research into sound weapons. I have a huge file of articles about the experiments the U.S. military, the French military did with sound weapons in the 60s and 70s, and you know, they were really worried about like what was going to happen when they launched the Saturn V, because the vibrations, no one knew what was going to happen. The big rocket, the low frequency vibrations, maybe everyone's going to just dissolve into a puddle of muck. But they had to find out before they built the rocket, so they would lock soldiers into these chambers and pulsate like 180 decibels at like 40 hertz at them, and then have them do like IQ tests. And so they didn't turn into a puddle of goo, but they did. They, you know, under really high, loud, you know, high pressure, low frequency sound, it's the equivalent of like drinking a few drinks. Like you can't perform as good. So for SRL, of course, that's perfect for some poor private locked in a room suffering. You know, it's one thing. But for an audience in an SRL show, it lowers their IQ a little bit, running that V1 or the jet whistle, and that makes it a lot easier. People who are a little bit lost their edge, they can look at a bunch of machines moving around and go, this is kind of a show, you know? It's not just, those machines don't do that much, but yeah, I saw a show, I think, you know? it blurs the sharp edges a little bit, which is a very useful thing, and like that ended up being like a real important factor in SRL shows, those really extreme things. So that's a good example, but it's basically different ways to deal with like high energy stuff. I mean, Greg Lay put it very succinctly one time. He goes, the ultimate fantasy that every physicist has is to release as much energy in the shortest period of time as possible. And I looked at Greg Lay and I was like, that is a brother speaking there to me. And Greg is really, he has really dedicated his life to that. And he built his first Tesla coil at SRL. But another thing I think that was a really interesting thing was the plasma channel gun that Greg made, where he really put his money where his mouth is. And we had an 80 kilojoule capacitor bank, and he made, Tim Wadlington made this gun for him like a Gatling gun that fired these little darts that had a nickel wire connected to them. You couldn't see the darts, you couldn't see the wire, but if you had 80 kilojoules and the right switching stuff, and you fired the dart at something grounded, you would take all those 80 kilojoules and make a plasma explosion that looked like a beam weapon about 30 feet long. And so here is something that was just out of a physics experiment that was, we only really used it once in a show, and it was in France, it was indoors. Greg was in there with it trying to run it, and he ran it for about half the show, and like afterwards I said, how come you guys didn't keep running that thing? He goes, that thing is so fucking loud in there, it's gonna kill us. The explosions were so intense that we just had to stop. I was like, oh, okay. So.
Freddie, what do you got? The head of Jerry Garcia. Do you remember what year that was, Freddie?
I don't know. Like I said, it's all blur. But I mean, we probably didn't realize it was Jerry Garcia. We probably didn't take it literally as like a representation of, I mean, it was beat up and stuff, right? So it could have been anybody, really. But yeah, no, I know. Wind it up here. So another questions or Jennifer? Wait a minute. Okay.
So, if anybody wants to support SRL, we're starting a Patreon for Mark. And we are going to put out videos of Mark swearing and whining at machines.
That's right. No, it's not for me, it's for SRL. So it's like every dime that doesn't go to survival goes to Survival Research Labs. And my wife to some extent. No, she won't. Any more questions? Well, when I originally thought of SRL, I was like, you know what? I could do this. Like people in my family kind of, I mean, who knows about me, but people in my family have all lived till their 90s, mid-90s. My grandfather, 97, my great-grandmother, 95, my grandmother, like 90. So, the Paulines tend to live a long time, so I figured, even in view of that, I thought of the whole thing, when I kind of came up with the concept of SRL, I said, I could do this for like 75 years, and it would keep me busy for the rest of my life. And I was like, that's good, So I did imagine doing it, and I imagine doing it, until it's not possible anymore, but I don't know, you know. I mean, I'm 65 now. So, whatever, right? I still feel like a teenager. I don't really feel any different than I did when I was a teenager yet. But one of these days, and you know what my mom told me? I'll tell you what my mom told me, and I think about this all the time. She said, she was like late 70s, and she goes, you know, when people get old, they really don't get any more tired because they just pretend to. You can't, she goes, you can't really tell the difference. It's just they're lying. And I was like, no shit. She goes, yep. She goes, you don't really feel any different, you know, I guess till you drop dead or something. But she goes, I can't tell the difference. I was like, huh, how about that? A secret from the elders.
Yeah, as far as slowing down, I'm 60. Mark's got 5 years on me, but I have no intention of stopping doing anything as long as I can walk or crawl. And we'll do an SRL show anytime we can get a show, a big show. I'll drop what I'm doing and go work on it, and hopefully build some big stupid prop, or if not that, do security for the show. But in the meantime, I got back involved in urban exploration heavily in the last 5 or 6 years. And I just like to say for people who, I mean, when I showed up in San Francisco, people told me that the party was over. You know, I showed up in '76, and they said the party was over, and they were full of shit, basically. And it's, you know, it was mostly hippies telling me that, and I had a hard time trusting hippies after that. But, you know, the punk scene started, the Suicide Club started. I met guys like this, and we did this stuff. And so, you know, kids now are like, oh man, it must have been great. SRL shows, blowing shit up, Burning Man, early Burning Man. I'm like, yeah, it was great, whatever. That was like a long time ago. There's stuff happening right now. And in the urban exploration world, which I love, it's way bigger, more amazing, more diverse, more incredible than it was in the 70s. And their kids, I can't talk about it though. And that's the secret. It's like they're doing it. There are underground exploration cabals all over the world, and they're doing shit constantly. There are conventions of people. There are, you know, hundreds, if not thousands, of people who meet in Vienna, in Minneapolis, and places all over the world, and exploring the urban infrastructure. And they you won't find it online. You won't find most of it online. And it's happening now. I mean, we climbed Sutro Tower with a bunch of young guys too, like a year and a half ago. Who would have thought you could do that, right? We used to climb it in the 70s and the 80s, and then I just figured the security was impossible. It's not. But you know, I didn't say that, but you can still do it, right? And you can't prove that we did it though. And there's cameras everywhere, but they don't watch the cameras.
Well, I'd just like to thank John Law for everything he's done within SRL, to SRL, and through SRL over the years, and just for all the other weird, just for being just another San Francisco weirdo. And, you know, another, I just say it like, why isn't, you know, of course everyone's like that, right? But, you know, John is just a spectacular example, so I just have to say I appreciate it endlessly. But I'm going to give my Survival Research Labs public service message, like I always do. If any of you know people or locations where we might be able to do a show locally, or maybe people with lots of money who who don't want to look too carefully at my spotless past record in the area, and that may want to be co-conspirators in an SRL show locally, please don't hesitate to contact me or any other person at SRL who represents the organization, and tell us what's what about these people and institutions. And you know, we are always ready to do these shows. We can do these shows in a heartbeat. We are more prepared to do these big shows than ever. But you know, we always end up doing them in some other town or some other country around the world. It's so much easier to do them locally and so much cheaper. So, that's it. Thank you.
Hey, wait a minute. Mark is a very early tech person. For all you techies who are not here, Mark got srl.org. That was impossible.
1992, that was.
All right, well, that's it. We got to wind up. There's another show coming on tonight. I strongly recommend, especially if you're into industrial and that type of thing. And Mike, who's a tech guy here, who's awesome, is helping to put on and promote this show. And it's industrial experimental music and performances featuring Podblots up from LA, Piano Rain, and La Macacoa. And it's a $5 to $15 donation. It's going to be a really killer show presented by Rat Skin Records. And once again, Mike Dodona, who's the tech guy here, who's totally awesome, is promoting and producing the show, and they're a lot of fun. This space, Pro Arts Gallery, is a community-based gallery. It's a nonprofit. They need help. You know, any rich people tell them to send some fucking money over here, all right, to keep places like this going. I'm dead serious. They need to, you know, tax deductible, like a donation, to keep places like this going. And they work this room. There's events going on here and really cool stuff happening several nights a week, and that is amazing. It's done with almost very few resources. And I'd just like to thank the gallery for that, and Natalia Mount, the director here. Thank you very much for coming. Next Thursday, I'm going to have Don Heron, who does the Dash Limit Walking Tour, the longest-lived literary walking tour in the country, if not the world, who is in the Suicide Club with me. We're going to talk about doing live-action role-playing games in the Suicide Club. Don Heron, next Thursday here at the gallery. Thank you very much.